Let me ask you something. What do you do when the person who was supposed to protect you is the one who destroyed you? Not a stranger, not a coworker, not someone you barely know. The person who stood across from you at an altar, who held your hand when your mother was sick, who kissed you on the forehead and told you everything was going to be fine. What do you do when that person is the reason your life is falling apart? I know the answer now, but I didn't always. My name doesn't matter. What matters is this: I was a good wife. Not perfect, but I was good. I showed up, I worked hard, I saved money. I planned for the future with the kind of discipline that comes from growing up without much and swearing you'd never feel that way again. For 7 years, I believed I was building something real with my husband, Daniel. A life, a foundation, security that neither of us had as kids. We weren't flashy. We weren't careless. We had a joint savings account, a shared budget spreadsheet, and a 5-year plan that we reviewed together every single January. And in January of 2026, that plan finally felt close enough to touch. We were ready to buy our dream home. Not a mansion, not something ridiculous, but a beautiful 4-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood with good schools, a big backyard, and a kitchen I had been dreaming about since I was 17 years old. We had the down payment saved. We had stable income. We had years of careful financial decisions stacked behind us. So when we sat down with the mortgage broker in early February, I was confident. I wasn't nervous. I was ready. Then my phone rang. It was our broker, and even before she finished her sentence, something in her voice made the room feel smaller. "I'm so sorry," she said. "Your pre-approval has been denied." I thought there was a mistake. I actually laughed a little. That awkward, confused laugh you do when something doesn't compute. I told her to run it again. She said she already had. "Your credit score has dropped significantly," she said. "There are multiple outstanding accounts showing delinquency. High balance personal loans. Revolving credit near the maximum. It's a lot." I remember the exact moment the warmth left my body. I drove home in silence. I didn't call Daniel right away. Something in my gut told me to look first, to see before I spoke. So I pulled my full credit report the moment I walked through the door. And I sat there, alone at our kitchen table. And I read through the nightmare he had been building while I was sleeping. 6 credit lines I had never seen before. 4 personal loans opened over the past 3 years, totaling just over $190,000. 2 credit cards. Not our shared ones, but new ones, in accounts tied to our joint financial history. Both maxed. One was sitting at a $32,000 balance. The other, $28,500. The minimum monthly payments on everything combined were nearly $4,200 a month. I couldn't breathe. I sat back in that chair and I stared at the ceiling. And the first feeling wasn't anger. Isn't that funny? The first feeling was shame. Like somehow I had missed something. Like I should have caught this. Like this was, in some impossible, irrational way, my fault for not looking closer. That feeling didn't last long. Because then I started doing math. I started matching dates. The first loan, $45,000, was opened in March 2023. That was the same month Daniel told me he had been promoted at work, and that we needed to keep our finances separate for a while, so his employer could verify his income independently. I had thought that was odd, but he had an explanation. He always had an explanation. The second loan, $62,000, was opened 8 months later. Right around the time he started coming home late, twice a week, saying he had client dinners. The third and fourth opened within the same 6-month window last year, while I was busy managing my own mother's health crisis and trusting him completely to handle our accounts. I closed the laptop. I poured myself a glass of water, and I waited for my husband to come home. When the door opened, he was in a good mood. He was humming something. He kissed me on the cheek and asked what was for dinner. And I watched him, really watched him, move through our kitchen like a man with absolutely nothing to hide. That's when I realized he was either the best liar I had ever known, or he genuinely believed he hadn't done anything wrong. Both of those options terrified me. I set my phone on the table, credit report pulled up, and I slid it toward him. "Would you like to explain this?" I asked. He looked down, and for just 1 second, one tiny fractured second, the mask slipped, his jaw tightened, his eyes shifted. Then he smiled and said, "Baby, those are investments. Investments." He said it like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. Like I was the one overreacting. Like the woman sitting across from him. The woman who had spent 7 years building a life with him. Who had skipped vacations. Who had driven a 10-year-old car without complaint. Who had meal prepped to save money. Was simply being dramatic. I asked him to explain. And so he did. Calmly. Casually. Like a man who had rehearsed this speech and was simply waiting for the moment to deliver it. He told me about the cars. It started, according to him, 3 years ago. A friend had mentioned that vintage and rare collector cars were appreciating faster than most traditional investments. Real estate was volatile. The stock market was unpredictable. But cars, the right cars, properly sourced and maintained, were quietly becoming some of the most profitable assets in the private collector world. He said he had done his research. He said he had connected with a small network of private collectors and dealers. He said he had vision. That most people don't see value until it's too late, and he wasn't going to be most people. I asked him why he hadn't told me. He paused. And in that pause, I heard everything he didn't say. "I didn't want you to worry," he finally answered. "You were focused on saving for the house. I didn't want to distract you. I was going to pay everything off before you ever knew it existed." Read that back slowly. He was going to pay it off before I ever knew it existed. Which means he always knew I would have said no. He always knew I wouldn't have agreed. And so instead of having a conversation with his wife, his partner, he bypassed me entirely. He took out over $190,000 in debt connected to our joint financial history, without my knowledge, without my consent, and without any intention of ever telling me, unless he absolutely had to. That is not an investment strategy. That is a lie with a budget. I asked him where the cars were. And this is the part that made my chest tighten all over again. He had never brought a single one home. Not one. They were stored across 3 different private garages. 2 in the city, one about 40 minutes outside of town. He had been visiting them, tinkering, attending private auctions on weekends he told me were golf trips or work retreats. There was a 1967 Alfa Romeo Spider, European, immaculate, imported directly from a private estate sale in northern Italy. He paid $74,000 for it. A 2003 Ferrari Enzo replica, fully restored, custom interior, with authenticated documentation, though $58,000. A 1970 Plymouth Cuda, matching numbers muscle car. One of the rarest configurations ever produced in that model year. Road 82,000 and several others, smaller purchases, parts, accessories, tools, garage fees, insurance policies I had never seen on any of our shared accounts. While I was cutting our grocery budget and skipping weekend trips to save for our future, my husband was quietly building a private museum of steel and gasoline. I sat with that image for a long time, and then I asked the question that mattered most. What is the total value of everything you own right now compared to what you owe? He hesitated. The market has been a little slow, he said. How slow? More silence. Daniel, how much do you owe versus how much are they worth right now? He told me the cars, at current market estimates, were worth approximately 280,000, which sounds like a profit. Until he admitted the total outstanding debt had grown to 242,000 due to compounding interest and missed minimum payments over the past several months. Payments. He hadn't been paying them. He had been waiting for the right buyer to come along so he could sell everything in one clean sweep and walk away looking like a genius. Meanwhile, our mortgage application was denied. Our credit was wrecked. Our actual home, the one we lived in, was now at risk because the delinquency on some of those loans had flagged our existing mortgage account. We could lose the house we were already in. I stood up from that table very slowly. I told him I needed to think. He tried to reach for my hand and I stepped back. Not dramatically. Not with screaming or tears. I simply stepped back. Because something had shifted inside of me in those 2 hours. The grief was still there. The betrayal was still there. The disbelief that this man, this person I had chosen, had looked me in the eye for 3 years and told me things were fine while quietly dismantling everything we had built. But underneath the grief, something else was rising. Clarity. Cold, sharp, focused clarity. I went to my home office, closed the door, and I opened my laptop again. But this time I wasn't looking at the credit report. I was researching lawyers. I want you to understand something about the days that followed. I did not fall apart. I know that might surprise you. People expect the dramatic collapse. The crying on the bathroom floor. The calling your best friend at midnight. The visible unraveling that signals to the world that you've been hurt. And trust me, the hurt was real. There were moments, usually very early in the morning, when the house was still quiet and Daniel was asleep in the next room, where I sat with my coffee and just felt the full weight of it. But I did not fall apart, because I had made a decision, and once I made it, everything became very simple. Within 48 hours of that conversation at the kitchen table, I had a consultation booked with a family and financial law attorney named Carol. I will remember her name for the rest of my life. She was direct, thorough, and she did not waste a single minute of my time. I walked into her office with a printed copy of the credit report, a list of every loan account I had identified, and a question I needed answered before I could do anything else. Are those cars legally mine to sell? Carol reviewed everything I brought. She asked about the structure of our accounts, the timeline of the debt, whether my name appeared on any of the financing agreements. Most of them, it turned out, had been processed through structures tied to our joint financial history, using our shared credit profile and our combined income documentation to secure approval. Which meant that under the laws governing marital property in our state, those cars, purchased with debt that was tied to our joint financial life, were considered marital assets, both of ours. And because the debt they were purchased with was also connected to our joint accounts, damaging my credit just as much as his, I had both legal standing and a financial imperative to access and liquidate those assets to resolve the outstanding obligations. She walked me through the process carefully. She explained what I needed: documentation of the titles, evidence of storage locations, a clear paper trail connecting the loans to the vehicles. She told me to move carefully, to document everything, and to make no sudden moves until we had a full picture. I spent the next 2 weeks doing exactly that. Daniel, for his part, had gone into what I can only describe as strategic charm mode. He brought home flowers once. He made dinner twice. He told me he had been thinking about everything, and that he had a plan to fix it. He spoke with renewed confidence about selling the cars himself, on his timeline, to the right buyers, for the maximum price. He asked me to be patient. I told him I was. I was not. While he was busy being charming, I was busy building a case. With Carol's guidance, I obtained copies of the vehicle titles, several of which, I discovered, listed our joint address. I photographed documentation. I cross-referenced auction records with the loan disbursement dates. I contacted a specialist automotive auction house that Carol had worked with before, a firm that dealt specifically in rare and collector vehicles, that had access to serious private buyers, and that could move multiple high-value assets quickly when the situation required it. And then I waited for the right moment. It came on a Thursday evening in late March. Daniel told me he was going to drive out to check on the cars. One of the garage facilities had emailed him about a lease renewal, and he wanted to take inventory. He left around 6. He said he'd be back by 9. At 6:15, I made a phone call. By 7 o'clock, the auction house representatives had been notified, the documentation had been submitted, and the process had officially begun. I want to be clear about something. I did not act recklessly. I did not act out of rage. Every step I took had been reviewed by Carol. Every document had been verified. Every sale was structured to directly offset the outstanding debt. Not to profit, not to punish, but to correct. Over the following 9 days, the cars sold. The Plymouth Cuda went first, the rarest of the collection. A private buyer in Texas had been looking for that exact configuration for 2 years. He moved quickly. The sale closed at $91,000. That single transaction wiped out 2 of the 4 personal loans entirely. The Alfa Romeo Spider sold 3 days later. The $78,000 to a collector in London who had the car shipped overseas within a week. That covered the 3rd loan and a significant portion of the 4th. The Ferrari replica and the remaining vehicles sold over the following days. Each negotiated firmly, each payment directed immediately toward the outstanding balances. And then Daniel came home one afternoon to find that his garages were empty. I was sitting in the living room when I heard his car pull into the driveway. I heard the door open. I heard him walk into the kitchen, drop his keys, and then go still in a way that told me he had checked his phone. The auction house sends transaction notifications. I had added myself as a co-owner contact on the accounts. He had received them all. When he walked into the living room, his face was a color I had never seen on him before. Not quite red, not quite pale. Somewhere in between. The specific shade of a man who has just realized that the chessboard he thought he was controlling has been flipped entirely. "What did you do?" he said. His voice was very quiet. "I did what you should have done 18 months ago," I replied. "I sold the cars." The argument that followed was loud. It was ugly. He used words like theft and betrayal and how dare you. He told me I had no right. He told me I had destroyed something irreplaceable. He told me I had embarrassed him in front of the entire collector community he had spent years building relationships with. I waited for him to finish. And then I said, "You opened $214,000 in debt without telling me. You ruined my credit. You almost cost us our home. You lied to my face for 3 years. And I sold your cars? Legally. To pay back the debt you created. That's not betrayal, Daniel. That's consequence." He had nothing left to say. Neither did I. The debt didn't disappear overnight. That's the thing about real life. Even when you do everything right, the cleanup still takes time. But it moved. After the final car sale closed, we had eliminated approximately $187,000 of the $214,000 in outstanding debt. The remaining balance, just under $27,000, was structured into a formal repayment plan that Daniel signed under legal supervision, acknowledging both the debt and his sole responsibility for it. Carol made sure of that. It took another 4 months for the delinquency flags to begin clearing from my credit profile. 4 months of watching the numbers inch upward. 4 months of monitoring, documenting, disputing where necessary, and staying patient when patience was the last thing I wanted to practice. But they moved. By July, my credit score had recovered enough to have a real conversation with a financial advisor about next steps. By September, the threat of foreclosure on our existing home had been completely removed. The account was current. The flags were gone. Our standing with the lender had been restored. And my credit score, it crossed back above 720 in October. I remember the day I saw that number. I was standing in my kitchen. The same kitchen where I had slid that credit report across the table. And I looked at my phone, and I felt something I hadn't felt in almost a year. Relief, not joy, not triumph, just the deep, steady exhale of a woman who had been holding her breath for a very long time and was finally allowed to breathe. Now, I know you want to know about Daniel. Here's the honest answer: that story is still being written. We are separated. The process is underway. There are lawyers and paperwork and conversations I never imagined having at this stage of my life. There are days that are harder than others. Days when I drive past a neighborhood that looks like the one we planned to live in, and I feel a quick, sharp ache for the future that got stolen from me. But here is what I want you to understand. That ache doesn't paralyze me anymore. Because I chose myself. And that choice, that single, deliberate, terrifying choice to stop protecting someone who was destroying me, changed everything. When I think about the woman who sat at that kitchen table in February, staring at a credit report she didn't recognize, that first feeling of shame she had, that woman who wondered if somehow it was her fault for not looking closer, I want to go back and sit beside her. I want to tell her, none of this is your fault. You trusted someone who used your trust like a tool. And the fact that you didn't see it isn't weakness. It's what happens when a careful, methodical, deceptive person works very hard to keep you in the dark. Trust is not naivety. Being deceived is not stupidity. The failure here was never yours. But here's the thing about this story that I think matters most. The thing that keeps people up at night when they're in situations like mine, too afraid to act. We are taught, especially as women, to manage the peace, to smooth things over, to protect the image of the household, the marriage, the man. We are taught that loyalty looks like silence, that love looks like covering up, that a good wife absorbs the damage and keeps smiling. I am here to tell you, that is not loyalty. That is self-erasure. There is nothing disloyal about holding someone accountable for the harm they caused. There is nothing vengeful about refusing to be destroyed quietly. What I did, selling those cars, paying down that debt, protecting my financial future, was not an act of revenge. It was an act of survival. And the most powerful part, I didn't need him to apologize for it to be valid. I didn't need him to admit he was wrong. I didn't need his remorse, his regret, or his changed heart. I didn't need any of it. Because I had already done what needed to be done. I have been asked since all of this unfolded, do you regret it? Not for a single second. Do I grieve the marriage I thought I had? Yes, deeply. I grieve the version of Daniel I believed he was. I grieve the house we never bought, and the future we never got to build. I grieve the years I invested in a partnership that turned out to be more performance than truth. But I do not grieve the cars. Not the Plymouth. Not the Alfa Romeo. Not a single chrome detail of a single machine he chose over our life. Because those cars were never just cars to him. They were symbols of something he wanted. Control, status. A secret self that existed completely outside of the life we supposedly shared. They were his hidden world, his private empire. The place where he got to be someone that had nothing to do with budgets or compromises, or a wife who asked too many questions. He wanted those machines more than he wanted our future. And so I let him have the memory of them. I took the money. I cleared our name. And I kept the life. There is a moment. And I hope you hear this clearly. There is a moment in every situation like mine where you have a choice. You can collapse inward. Protect him out of habit. Stay small out of fear. And let the damage quietly consume you. Or you can look at what's left. Figure out what's legally and morally yours to reclaim. And take action. I chose action. He gambled our future on machines made of steel and ego. He bet that I wouldn't look. That I wouldn't ask. That I wouldn't do anything even if I found out. He was wrong about all three. So if you're sitting somewhere right now, recognizing pieces of your own story in mine, if there's something in your life that someone is asking you to stay quiet about, I want you to remember this. Staying silent is a choice. So is speaking up. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can ever do is simply refuse to keep someone else's secret. I used to think the keys to our future were in Daniel's hands. Turns out, I had them the whole time.